Michelle. Another name turn over here.
Woo, another Michelle.
Yeah, how's it going?
Good. How are you doing?
Good. I
Good.
am gonna get us to dive right in, and there's
Sure.
no other person that knows you best but you. So kick things off, introduce yourself, and I also want you to share what your superpower is.
All right. Sounds good. Well, my name is Michelle Murphy. I'm the owner of Michelle Murphy Interior Design here in Calgary. I offer residential and commercial design services locally as well as virtually online anywhere in North America. My superpower, I'd probably say just kind of being able to take people's wishes and turn it into something that they never thought they could. So, having that vision and being able to help people portray that, a lot of people get stuck on how to get to that final product. So I'd say having sort of that creative side, technical, details, things like that, I'm able to pull it together. So, yeah.
Yeah. I think there's something to be said about bringing someone's vision about what they want to life when in their head they might have it, as clear as glass of what it looks like. And when someone's like, she got it, like she did it, and it's
Yeah,
just like such a good feeling.
absolutely.
Yeah, I love
Yeah.
that. So the reason why I wanted to have you on the podcast is because I really believe in our environments contributing to the quality of our life. Because a lot of our behavior is dictated by our surroundings. So I want to kick things off from your experience. Generally, how does your living space impact our quality of life and our health?
Sure. I mean, you can go into a lot of detail with that for sure, but I'll start with just a broad sort of overview. But
Mhm.
anything from the function of a space, right? If a space doesn't work well for you and how you use it, I mean, right then and there, that's already going to create an impact on your life, make it more difficult, make it more stressful. Um, I mean, then you get into more details, is your space organized and, you know, thoughtfully created in a way that supports you rather than messy, disorganized, chaotic. It produces more stress in your life, right? Those sort of elements. And then, I mean, you can dive into things like light and plants and air quality, all those things that play an impact on our, you know, enjoyment of the space, but as well as our health and well-being, right?
Mhm.
You want to make sure that you're living in a space that's treating you well, and especially if you're there long term, right? If you work from home, you're probably in that space more often than not, and you want to make sure that you're in a healthy environment.
Yeah, I love that. So I think from what I heard, you touched on three things. So
Hmm.
function, flow, how does traffic move?
Yep,
Then you talked about organization, and then you talked about a little bit of like lighting, colors, what affects mood and energy. Uh,
absolutely.
can we unpack those a little bit more?
Of course. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so tell me a little bit more about function and flow. And you're probably like, Michelle, there's so many rooms in a home. Like, what does that mean?
Yeah,
I guess when you're consulting with clients, what is the number one room or problem clients present you with saying, like, it's just not working?
sure.
It's function
I'd
and flow.
say the number one is probably kitchens. Most of the time, that's probably one of the bigger renovations in a home. So a lot of people live with it the way it is for quite a while until they're able to afford to do that renovation. So I find that when a client brings me in for a kitchen, that's usually something they've been struggling with for a while, and they realize that, but they don't always know what is causing that struggle, I guess, or what's making the space not work for them. So I'd say from a function standpoint, the biggest thing is like that's a heavy use space, right? Whether you're cooking, whether you have guests, you want to make sure that it's flowing and functioning well for what you need. So some of the details I jump into usually with clients, and I think we even chatted about this before, was sort of that work triangle, right? That's your main function and flow in a kitchen, is you want to make sure those 3 points, your sink, your fridge, and your stove, oven, range, whatever your setup is, all sort of have that triangle, just because that creates a nice flow. It allows you to utilize the space well. Those are your 3 main components when you're cooking. So that's really the biggest piece in a kitchen. And then, I mean, you dive into all the little bits and pieces, okay, if my dishwasher is here, where do my dishes go? Is that accessible? Do I want to be carrying my plates halfway across the kitchen to put them away? Probably not. So you want to think about details like that when you're planning the kitchen.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I love the idea, or the knowledge behind the triangle, because not every place, even my apartment, it's a line. It's not a triangle, right?
Yeah.
However, I like being able to have flow. It's not like it's cut off and I'm
Yeah.
stuck in this little, almost like a rat stuck in a maze, right?
Yes.
So I think there's so many factors to consider. And when I think about the idea of this triangle, and I relate it to health, of, do you enjoy cooking in your kitchen? Because a lot of health related behaviors is eating. It's our necessity, right?
Absolutely.
So when you think about the design of the kitchen, I think that's something so important to be able to consider, because you want it to be a health promoting environment versus a health hindering environment. So if people don't, let's say, aren't ready to make that investment in their kitchen, what do you feel are some simple tips or tricks that you could recommend to maybe encourage better use of the kitchen, and maybe helping them consume maybe more nutritious foods or whatnot?
Sure, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a big investment. So that's a great question as to how people can sort of utilize the space they have if they aren't ready to tackle that big of a project. A couple things I'd suggest is, one, just consider how you have everything stored right now. So, for example, like I mentioned, the dishwasher and your dishes. Is there a way that maybe you could swap things around, move them around a little bit in your kitchen to make it more practical? So make sure that the dishes that you're using all the time are accessible to everyone in the family. Make sure it makes sense with where the dishwasher or sink is, because those will be used hand in hand. Um, Leaning a little more onto the nutritional side that you mentioned, and eating healthier and better choices. Think about where you're putting those items. Is the fruit sitting in a nice bowl on the counter so it's easily accessible and you can grab that, rather than digging into a cabinet for a treat that you might not need? Or even in the fridge, set it up in a way that you're going to see those items first that you should be choosing over something that maybe you don't indulge in all the time. So it's little tricks like that, just to make the space not only function better, that you can find what you need and use the space how you need to, but also, putting forward those pieces that you should be maybe eating or using, rather than jumping to some of those, once in a while treats.
Yeah. Well, I want to, for the listeners, to also provide assurance that all foods are welcome into our diet. It's more of, how is our environment promoting behaviors that our bodies are going to enjoy a little bit more. So for instance, I remember when I was living at home, this is something that was important to me, was we see it at the grocery store, the things that are at eye level are going to be the most eye catching.
Absolutely.
So even, when you're designing the fridge, and organizing it rather, that's something to consider. Same with the pantry and all that stuff, because
Absolutely.
we're human, we're looking for the path of least resistance. So
yeah.
if we can keep, foods on the counter, or things that are more accessible to us, that our bodies can be like, yes, thank you for this. I'm going to the washroom better. I'm thinking more clearly because of these. Then why not put those systems in place? So
Absolutely.
I appreciate that. Let's go on to organization, because you had an
Sure.
awesome blog around like top design mistakes. And the fourth mistake on this blog was over cluttering spaces. So let's talk a little bit more about organization.
Sure.
How can we navigate that?
Absolutely. I mean, organization is a big one. You don't need high-end, storage pieces or a luxury organizer to come in and help you, but it's as simple as keeping your space less cluttered, and the things that you need on a daily basis are easily accessible and ready to use. Having a cluttered space or a space that isn't easy to navigate is going to create more stress in your life. And I'm sure everyone knows how bad stress is for us, right? The little things we can do to reduce that stress in our lives makes a huge difference. So even just being able to tuck away more things, it's nice to be able to access things easily, but the more you have on your counter, for example, makes it harder to cook when you need to, just feels a bit more cluttered. So is there ways to tuck things away that aren't used all the time? A big sort of piece that people have been adding in kitchens more recently, which is kind of funny because it was popular in the 70s and it's coming back, of course, are appliance garages. Rather than having your toaster, your kettle, your coffee maker all out on the counter, we'll build a little cabinet that basically sits on your counter and can tuck all those small appliances away. So it's still easily accessible, still something you probably use on a regular basis, but again, just gets rid of some of that clutter and chaos that might feel overwhelming on a regular basis.
Wow.
Yeah, so it's just like a little one that's kind of come back around again that a lot of people are putting in their kitchens. And then again with the work from home, right? Like so many people are working from home and you need that to be a productive and focused space, right? So the more clutter and chaos in the space, it's going to be harder to focus. You're going to be like, oh, maybe I should take, time to clean up. And it's just going to distract you from what, you should be using the space for.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
so interesting. I actually hadn't heard of an appliance garage until I was today years old.
There you
So
go.
I didn't know that. And I do feel like society is moving towards the more clean, minimalist trend. Less is more. And I mean, there's so many relationships to that, even in health, that we can make comparisons to.
Absolutely.
Because usually when our mind is cluttered, the first thing we think of is like, okay, chances are our space is cluttered. And I
Yep.
know when I'm having really bad weeks, when there's laundry piling up and there's just so much crap on the counter, it can be so overwhelming to think about, how am I going to tackle this? And I really want to encourage like anyone listening, just like behavior change, like one bite at a time. If you put
Yes.
away like 5 pieces of clothing, that's 5 more than
Yep.
you didn't.
Start small. You got to
Yeah.
start somewhere, right?
Yeah. And speaking of that, when you're thinking about all rooms of the home,
Mm-hmm.
what are strategic ways on becoming more organized versus like just saying like put stuff away?
Sure. I'd say a couple tips would be one, think about what the space is used for. So, for example, your bedroom. One thing that a lot of people do to maybe not organize necessarily, but again, reduce sort of that clutter or chaos in a space is just making your bed every day. It's a simple task that you can do, but it creates sort of that cleaner, nicer energy in the space, right? That maybe, would create some overwhelm, I guess, if you come in and you're like, oh, my bed is a mess, there's laundry on the floor, things like that. So that would be one little thing that I'd suggest. Maybe start making your bed if you don't. Another thing you could try is with clothes, right? Like you mentioned, if there's clothes on the floor or something or piling up, it sort of stresses you out. So maybe that's something you could start doing, is either making sure you clean up every day, just tucking those clothes into the hamper rather than leaving a pile on the floor. Or maybe you spread out laundry a little bit more so that it's not piling up. So maybe it's like, hey, I'll do a load today and a load in a couple days, and then it spreads things out and doesn't feel as chaotic, doesn't put that stress and unpleasant overwhelm on you every time you enter the room, right?
Mhm.
And just simple tricks to not allow yourself to get to a point where it is overwhelming as well, right? Like you said, the small bite sizes, right? Just start small. If you go into a room that, you've just left chaotic for a bit and you're like, oh my gosh, I need to tackle this, it's going to end up feeling just as overwhelming as leaving it versus doing it because it just feels so big and too much to do. So start with some small bite-sized pieces and see what works for you, right? Make sure that you just start with something like using the hamper, cleaning off your counter after you're done getting ready in the morning so that when you come home to get ready in the evening, you don't have a mess all over the vanity, right? Things like that to just start small and see what feels good.
Yeah. So I love this because speaking of vanity, I think especially, identifying as a woman and having so many products in my goddamn washroom. And it's like, I'm looking at things and I'm like, it's expired like 3 years ago. Why do I have it? And I
Absolutely.
think of that even with my clothes of like, I haven't worn this in 3 years.
Yeah.
I think it's time to let go, right?
Yeah.
So I think that's another thing a lot of the listeners here can benefit from. I'm not too sure if you're a big fan of Marie Kondo. I really believe like, is this making me feel joyful right now? If not,
Yeah.
thank you for its service. Like on to its next life,
Yes.
right? You can donate your clothes,
Absolutely.
like products you can recycle. So I think that's another thing of the whole less is more approach.
Yes. It's a great tip. Yeah, definitely. I mean, again, start small, even like you said, if you just start cleaning off your vanity and pull out those items that you don't use or expired, right?
Mhm.
That's one step in the right direction. And then, there's tips and tricks for things like turning your hangers a certain direction once you've worn the clothes so that you know that you are using that piece. So, if it's facing a certain direction, you've worn it within the last few months. If it hasn't, then you haven't touched it in 6 months and maybe it's time to move on, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
No, I appreciate that. And I'm sure like I guess I see on Amazon different types of shelving and containers you can put in or beneath cabinets and
Yeah.
whatnot. So I think there's so many ways to get organized in that way. Are there anything specific in terms of home organization that comes up a lot with clients that you feel would be worthwhile sharing with the audience today?
Yeah. I think one that I've used a lot with clients that's kind of, I'd say, forgotten, I guess, um, is trying to utilize spaces like under your bed. So, for example, spaces that maybe you don't see every day or don't think about, but seasonal, right? There's clothes that you don't need year round in Calgary. And so, is there things we can tuck away under the bed somewhere that's not in our way and probably is underutilized, right? If there's nothing under there now, it's just an empty space. So, that's a big one, is I usually try to tell clients to think about spaces that aren't being used or underutilized and how can you use them better. So, under the bed storage is a big one. Um, Another one is probably trying to think a little more on the functional side with a lot of people working from home is how can you set up your desk a little better? So, are there ways to store paper and pen if that's what you use? A lot of people are digital now, but there's still, how can you organize your cords so it doesn't look chaotic, right? So cord managers are a big component in work from home. Just little things that can sort of make that a healthier, productive space, right? So yeah, I'd say under bed storage is probably the biggest. Um, and then desk and wire management, just organizing your workspace are probably the biggest ones.
It's great to live in the 2020s when everything is Bluetooth.
Yes.
Right?
Yes, that's very true. A lot less cords than we used to have, right?
Yeah. And just not having to, the mouse isn't moving correctly, getting frustrated, it doesn't have the smooth rhythm you're looking for. So I think there's
Absolutely.
such a valid point, and I'm glad you actually went to home office because I think that I mean, I work from home and my like curating the space so that you feel excited to be in front of the
Mhm.
computer, excited to do your work. You talked about cord management, organization with papers, pens. Can you tell us a little bit more about what makes a home office um, a better work environment? What can we
Sure.
what achieves that?
Yeah, absolutely. So, with organization, that's great. Going to give you a nice productive space, less chaos. But another big thing to think about is ergonomics. So, is your space set up in a way that's not only comfortable but healthy for you? You want to make sure that the chair you're sitting in for, probably 6 to 8 hours a day, is supporting you, right? So whether that's something that has some more lumbar support, to make sure that you're sitting properly and giving you the support you need. Maybe you need a chair that's adjustable so that as you're sitting there for longer periods, you can adjust and move a little bit better, rather than sitting there for too long in an uncomfortable position, right? I used to work in office furniture, so I have a lot of background in all the many options that are out there. But you don't have to go into something big and fancy to get what you need. You just need to make sure that you have some support and flexibility. Another thing that's not as design related, but something I recommend as well is, maybe trying to stand up every so often. So for me, for example, I have a reminder on my Apple Watch to make sure that I'm getting up every hour, right? So little things like that. Maybe you have a sit stand desk. Those are very popular nowadays with people working from home, and gets you up and moving a bit. So it's, a design element in terms of getting that piece of furniture and putting it in your space, but it plays into your health and productivity and all of that, right? Um, Another thing to consider is natural light. So with work from home, a lot of people just had to make space and find somewhere that they could work, right? So some people did probably end up in basements or spaces that didn't have as much natural light. So if you don't have that in your workspace, how can we bring that in? So try to bring in some natural elements, try to have good lighting, even if it's not natural lighting, just to make sure that you're utilizing light and feeling better in the space. Um, and then also the color of the room, right? So think about what you're trying to accomplish in the space, what kind of work you do. Do you want something lighter and brighter that's going to kind of create a nicer, relaxing energy? Do you need some more power and, um, you know, push to get going? Do you need something a little bolder and stronger that, gets you there? So there's a lot of little elements that you can do to make the space work for you.
Mhm. Yeah, and from what I'm hearing, it comes down to like your personality, what helps you tick a little bit better. And
Absolutely.
I love that you have experience in home office furniture. And when I think about designing a work environment that promotes, I'm all about movement, right? Because I don't believe there is poor posture. There's just lack of movement,
Right.
right? And when we think of how our living situations might promote a lack of movement, I am so curious to know how can we create a space that incorporates more mobility. And so for me, like my desk, I have a standing desk, it's always set to standing. And this is where I would love your opinion, because by default I come to this and I stand. Like I
Right.
there's there's a chair, but it's not, honestly, not the best. I'll show you. It's just a bar stool.
There you go. Yeah.
And like I've used chairs with lumbar support and it is absolutely wonderful.
Yeah.
However, most of them are designed to be like lower table height, not
Yes.
high table height. So I guess I love keeping my desk standing. I don't stand all the time.
Sure.
Our bodies actually enjoy rest as well. So
Yeah.
I promote the mix of both. Do they make office chairs that go up very high?
Yeah, so there are options. It's more of a adjustable bar stool style office chair. So it's similar in terms of, having the functionality and sort of that look of an office chair, right? But it does give you that adjustable height that a bar stool might have. So that would be something a little more flexible for people that maybe want to have that sit stand and tend to keep their desk standing like you do. That could be something that you utilize because you could, rest on it while your desk is still in that standing position. But still allows you to go down to that sort of standard seat height if you prefer to raise and lower your desk. But that's a great way to keep moving if you don't have that style of chair, because it makes you have to get up and adjust your desk or move the desk down to sit, right? So there's ways to utilize that, I guess, in your favor so that it gets you moving. You also mentioned just other ways to get people up, and something like you can see your kitchen space from where you're working, but if you want more tea or water or something, then you have to get up and move and go get it, right? So it's nice to have the convenience of things close by, but it's nice to not have it convenient enough that you never have to get up, right?
Yeah.
So that's something to think about too, is maybe if you use a printer or something, maybe you don't have it close enough that you can just reach it from where you're sitting. Maybe you have to get up to go get your printed document, and that's just another way to keep you moving. That's usually tends to be easier in an office environment, a more corporate environment than your home, but those are just little tricks that you can do in your own space, right? Is there a way to make it a little less convenient for you to just reach over and grab? So
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, case in point, like you leveraging your Apple Watch, having the
Mhm.
stand hours, standing at least
Yeah,
1 minute per hour. That's a good friendly reminder when you're kind of immersed in your work to break
totally.
up the sleeping time.
Yeah.
Um, and I also think about, so one of my clients, to help her space, her workflow, she actually brings a kettle into her office, but her office is fairly large and it's
Okay.
on the other side of the room. So even like,
Perfect.
you know, you're staying hydrated, you're
Yeah.
getting a little bit more steps. And beautiful thing about drinking water, what goes in also has to come out. So you're gonna get steps with going to the
That's
washroom,
true. Yep.
right? So
Yeah.
it's just a simple hack. And they also have chairs. I've seen this on Instagram.
Mhm.
I'm not too sure. I feel like I've heard it branded as the ADHD chair, which just means a chair that allows you to explore different body
Yes.
positions and movements. Have you
Yeah.
had experience with that?
Yeah, so I actually don't think I've had any clients that have had them, but I've had a few friends that do. And they've said it's been really nice for them to not only keep them from just sitting in one position too long, but it also helps more on the focus side too, right? Because they tend to be someone that needs a little more of that movement or tend to be a little fidgety, right? So it kind of gives them that opportunity to help in terms of keeping them moving in a good way, but also supporting that need to move, right? So yeah, I've heard really good things. I haven't had any experience myself, but I've heard they're really good.
Yeah, I love
Yeah.
that. And for anyone listening, so what I love about this chair is it promotes different ranges of motion in your joints, especially your hip and your upper spine, which is for longevity for your joint health and just minimizing chronic pain. 10 out of 10 would recommend any environmental changes or structural changes to what you have in terms of furniture. And also know that it's okay to sit, to stand, to lie on your stomach on your laptop, sit cross-legged, opening up your hips and just exploring different ranges when you are working on a laptop, because your body's just going to love the nourishment of all different types of movement. So yeah, you spoke about natural light, and that was the third element that you talked about for design considerations.
Hmm.
Um, what if people don't have access to natural light?
Sure. Yeah, so we can dive a little bit more into that. So what I usually suggest is if you don't have natural light, the first thing is to make sure you have good artificial light. And the reason being, one, you don't have that natural light element that helps, light and bright the space. but having good lighting in the space in general, whether it's natural or artificial, um, allows you to work better, right? You're not going to have eye strain. You're not going to be, maybe hunching forward because you can't see your screen as well or read papers as well. So lighting is huge, whether natural or artificial. If you don't get that benefit of having the natural light, I say to try to bring in more natural elements. So you still kind of get that feel and joy of the natural environment. So things like plants, some natural textures, cooler colors, um, and just things that are going to give you more of that natural element or feel in the space. Just because it balances out a little bit more, right? If you think of ever being in like a basement bedroom or a basement workspace, right? It's usually a little bit darker, cooler, just not as comfortable. So try to make it cozier, more natural, bring in those elements you're missing, right? And then kind of playing into the movement. If you don't have that natural light, maybe try to get up and go somewhere in your home or workspace that gives you some natural light. So when you need a little break, oh, maybe can I run out to my patio for a minute and get a little bit of that natural light, soak up the sun and the warmth, and try to play into that movement aspect as well.
Well, excuse me. I appreciate that recommendation because I think one thing that COVID showed us is that it's very easy to stay indoors for like 12 hours, for 24 hours and be like, I did not experience any ultraviolet rays today. Like,
yeah.
And I really hope for those of you who are listening, even if you go out for like 2 minutes,
Yeah.
it really helps promote your circadian rhythm. Obviously, earlier in the day is better. However, getting out in general, just experience a different air quality, just different environment is going to be very nourishing.
Yeah.
You talked about, okay, if natural light isn't possible, we can use fluorescent light. Are there any recommendations in terms of the shade of the light bulb or the brightness?
So one thing to consider is probably what you're doing in the space. Most of us are probably computer users if we're working from home. So kind of sticking with a color temperature around 3000 is good. That's kind of your standard light fixture. That will give you sort of a warmer light, not quite as bright as daylight, but it's good for sort of your standard working environment. So that would be sort of what I recommend, is to go with 3000 Kelvin. And then if you are someone that maybe is, I don't know, doing something a little more hands-on for your work, maybe you're building something in your work environment, you can always go a little bit higher, go to maybe 4000 Kelvin, just because it gives you a little more functional light in terms of like actually needing to see little things. For example, like I usually recommend 4000 in a kitchen, but I'd recommend 3000 in your living spaces just because it's a little warmer, a little more comfortable. Typically closer to daylight, you're looking at about 5000 Kelvin, but that's pretty bright for a workspace. Especially if you don't have control over it. If you have dimmers and things like that, you can always play with a higher lighting temperature because you can adjust it a little bit better. But 3000 is usually my recommendation for sort of that comfort level. And typically type of light, I'd say LED, just because not only are they really good in terms of being environmentally friendly and energy efficient, they also usually have the most options nowadays.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And when you talk about lighting, you said, okay, if lighting's a limitation, or natural light is a limitation rather, bring out natural elements. And I love that. And then you talked about plants. And when it comes to choosing the right plants, any difference between having indoor plants that are imitation versus real?
Sure.
In terms of our health.
Absolutely. So in terms of health from an air quality standpoint, you'd want to have real plants just because they are going to help filter the air. and sort of that environment for you. But, you know, if we are talking about spaces that maybe don't have as much natural light, it can be harder to have those real plants, right? And not all of us are green thumbs. So, you know, there are opportunities to bring in faux plants that still give you that feel, right? They might not be offering that air filtering quality, but the texture, the color, all those components, that still gives us that natural feel that we're hoping for, right? When you go outside somewhere in the summer and everything's lush and green and thriving, it gives you a better feeling, right? So even if that's in an artificial um option indoors, you're still going to get that good energy from it. So I always lean towards having even a faux plant over not having anything at all, because you can still benefit from it.
Mm-hmm. There was a joke during COVID, for those of you who have fake plants during this time, you're always thriving because you don't have to take care of it, and it's always,
That's perfect.
yeah, yeah. So I've had lots of fake plants and a handful of real ones, and I think it's about choosing the right one that can thrive under the conditions that you're where you plan on putting it. So
Absolutely.
do you have a green thumb yourself in terms of understanding what plants to choose in what spaces?
A little bit. I typically lean towards some that are easier care just because I know myself that I end up getting wrapped up in other things and don't always remember to care for my plants. So I enjoy like having those real plants around, and I do luckily have a space that has um good natural light so I can have the real plants. But I try to lean towards things that are a little easier to care for. So some good ones are spider plants, snake plants, um, some more like succulents, just because they don't need to be watered as often. They do typically need more light though, so make sure that you have somewhere that they can get that. I'm not as familiar with ones that don't need as much light, but there certainly are some. So that can always be an option to look into if you do want to have that real plant, and take advantage of air quality and things like that, that it's going to help you with. Look into some that maybe don't need as much either direct sunlight or natural light. And a tip as well that I've used when I'm growing seedlings in like the spring, because we have to start things indoors in Calgary, is just grow lights. Like I just got one on Amazon, and it's great when we don't have enough natural light coming yet, or enough daylight to help support the plants. So that's another thing you can try as well, is if you really want to have a real plant in your space, but you're worried about it not getting enough light, is think about options like that.
Mm-hmm. Yes. One thing I love about snake plants is that they go up, so they're self-tamed.
Yes, you don't have to worry about them growing out, right?
Yeah, yeah, and then having to pick it and anchor it and all this
Yes,
stuff. So, and they're just such a beautiful range of colors that
yes.
just really draw you to that plant.
Hmm.
That is very helpful. I would love to talk more about, and we'll probably wrap things up here, because I think what you do is so important, and I think there's so many misconceptions with hiring an interior designer. I
Sure.
would love, if you're open to it, sharing what those misconceptions are and how would you go about debunking them?
Sure, absolutely. I'd say one of the biggest things I usually get from people that aren't as familiar with what an interior designer can do and how they can support you is, oh, you do like what they do on HGTV, right? Um, and in a sense, yes, some of the stuff you see is stuff that I do. You know, I'm happy to go help select colors and pick out pillows and decor and the prettier parts of design, right? But there's a lot more that goes into it. So I think a lot of times I just try to help my clients, friends, colleagues, whatever, kind of um, figure out, how I can actually support them, right? So going into talking about all those functional elements we talked about today, right? So how can we make your space work for you, is huge, because especially our homes, we're in them so often. So what can we do to get there? And that's something I can support you with. Um, Form follows function is like so true to me. A space can look beautiful in many ways. You can pick the best colors, you can pick the best finishes, and it will look stunning. But does that space work well for you? You can have a gorgeous kitchen, but if you can't cook in it functionally and you're running around and you are stressed every time you're in it, that's not a good environment, right? You have a dining or living space that can't accommodate your full family because it's not set up in a way to allow everyone to have a space to sit, right? So that function of a space is huge. You need to make sure it functions before it's beautiful. So that's something I usually tell clients is I help you with that whole piece, right? Start to finish, how can we get that space working for you? And then a lot of other people don't know as well that I'm sort of there to be your contact through a whole renovation. I like being brought in right at the start so that I can help you with the planning, come up with the whole design concept, and support you through the whole project. I can be sort of that coordinator between you and trades and contractors. And get you that start to finish result that you need that maybe you're not as familiar with, right? If it's something you haven't done in 20 years, you haven't renovated your home, maybe it's something you've never done, maybe it's your first renovation, right? There's a lot of headache, there's a lot of unknowns. And someone like myself that has, about 10 years experience in the industry, I've gone through a lot of renovations with clients, right? So I kind of know where those pain points are, where the hiccups will come in, and how we can avoid them. So that's a big one as well, is a lot of clients don't know that I can be there for that whole renovation process.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So you are a coordinator, you are a designer, you're also a little bit of a mental health professional with decreasing with stress
Yes, absolutely.
reduction. You're support person, like, and this is what, there's so much overlap in what you're saying in terms of what you do and what coaching is for health and wellness. And
Yeah.
I think where people might feel a little bit stuck is like, okay, this sounds amazing.
Mm-hmm.
How do you get over the hump of like the investment portion of,
Sure.
okay, I could do it on my own, I could get all the headaches, but like that investment scares me. How do you help clients do that?
Absolutely. Usually, I try to tell clients that the investment you make with a designer, you will end up saving yourself money in the long run. The reason being, one, I probably can make the process faster because I know the right vendors, I know the right trades, I have all those resources for you already. So you don't have to be sitting on Google for hours every night after you've worked your 9 to 5, trying to get all these bits and pieces together and sort it all out, right? The other component is avoiding those mistakes, right? So, if you find Joe on the side of the street to be your contractor, and you don't do your due diligence and know much about him, are you going to end up in a situation where maybe you're not getting the result you want? He unfortunately walks from the project and you've already paid him, things like that that you might not realize if you don't have the time to invest in it, right? So I end up saving clients a lot of time, money, and stress. Those are my 3 things that I usually tell clients is if you're unsure and don't feel that you have enough knowledge and experience to tackle this on your own, I will end up saving you money.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I really do feel like it's a simple reframe of saying very much to health and wellness, what's the pain of not changing? And what's going to happen if you continue to have an environment that is actually not promoting your health, because there's
Right.
also financial costs to your health.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, if you're working in an environment that's not working well for you, what is that long term going to do to your body, right?
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
what I like about what you said is that you have a team of trusted vendors and,
Hmm.
contractors and whatnot that you can call upon, and you've built relationships with, so the client doesn't have to go about doing that themselves,
Absolutely.
right? So I can just see how much that can decrease the stress on someone when there are so many moving parts of a renovation, which is why, okay, we're planning for, a 3-month renovation. Is it really going to be 3 months,
Probably not.
exactly, right? So I think there's comfort and ease in knowing that. Yeah. Is there anything you want the listeners to walk away with that they wish they knew more about in terms of curating their environment or maybe hiring a designer that you
Sure.
wish people would know?
Yeah, that they might want. I'd say the biggest thing I'd recommend is, start kind of like we talked about before, start small. If you're not ready to invest with a designer, what things can you start with? Or even if you are ready to chat with a designer, um, most of us are fine to support you with one area at a time, right? So can we start small rather than feeling overwhelmed by, hey, my whole house is not working for me. What can we do? Maybe we start with some of those points that are really, causing a struggle for you. Maybe your bathroom just getting ready in the morning is a real struggle because you don't have a big enough space. Maybe you only have one bathroom for your family of five, whatever it might be. Um, Start small. It doesn't have to be done all at once. It doesn't have to feel overwhelming. It's meant to support you in the end, give you that good space to live in, work in, thrive in. So however that looks for you, you don't have to go all out.
Yeah. Instead of tackling the kitchen, which feels like a mountain, tackle the washroom, which probably feels like a little
Exactly.
speed bump, right?
Yeah, exactly. Start small.
Yeah, no, I love that. And I just feel like that gives people hope of, okay, can I start with this little project,
Hmm.
gather whatever inspiration came out of that, and how can I apply it to the next project and maybe have that professional who helped me with this small project support me in this larger endeavor.
Absolutely.
It's all about building confidence, right? Same thing. Oh, I
Yes.
just love this conversation. There's so many parallels, and this is why I was so excited to have you on today. Where can people connect with you?
Sure.
Or,
Yeah, absolutely. You're welcome to check out my website, mmid.ca. I'm also very active on social media. So most of them are all just Michelle Murphy Design. Instagram is probably my top go-to for social, so you can see what's going on. And also on my website, feel free to sign up for my newsletter. There's a link right there to sign up, and that it's kind of a fun spot to get all the tips and tricks that I share in my monthly newsletter, as well as taking a peek at my blog. So
yeah,
yeah, lots of fun, and lots of projects if you want to see what's going on. And I love trying to share tips and tricks, because there's so many little things that you can do on your own. And I hope that people that see all of that get to take advantage of it and help make their space what it needs to be.
yeah, absolutely. I would love to endorse that message of, I really do feel like your blog and your social media, that's what I've been exposed to, has been so practical and hands-on, and you just have such a nice aesthetic in terms of, different colors and textures and palettes that you're working with. And one post that I really appreciated that you put up, which I feel like I can relate to, is like, just because you're an interior designer, just because I'm a women's health and movement coach, doesn't mean your home is exactly how you want it to be, and doesn't
Yep,
mean my health is exactly what I want it to be. I think just bringing the humanizing aspect to our work is
absolutely.
so comforting for people to know that it's okay not to have it all together, because
Yep.
as Ted Lasso would say, we are all a progress we are all a work in progress.
There you go. Perfect.
Yeah. Oh,
Yeah.
amazing, Michelle. It has been an absolute honor to have you today. Again, for those of you listening, you can check out her Instagram, her blog, sign up for her newsletter, and definitely check out her social media. She has some pretty helpful tips, especially on her reels. So thank you for tuning in, and we'll see you in the next episode.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you.